back to Network Nexus. Today we're going to talk about configuring a Cisco router 4331, and we're going to do basic configurations today. Today we're going to learn how we're going to do it, what are we going to use, software and connector / cable wise. So our first thing we're going to use is Putty. Putty is an open source software. I'll put the link in the description, where you can SSH to any machine you have on your network, use serial ports, or telnet even. Which telnet you should not use. It's very unsecure, and it's in plain text over the internet. You can have a man in the middle, take those credentials, and possibly hack your network. For today's purposes, we're going to use serial. Well, you might say, what is serial? Well, serial, in simplest terms, is just a way we communicate with computers using quite a bit to explain. But we're going to stick to the simplicity. This is just a beginner's video. For today, we're just going to say it's a way to communicate with computers. We'll keep it simple. So, as you can see here, it says COM1. So what is COM1, you may ask? Well, it's communications port 1. Well, how do we know if we're on port 1 or we use port 1? Well, there's two types of cables you can use to configure a Cisco router. So the first cable is called a rollover cable. On one end, it has an RJ45 connector, and on the other end, it has a DB9 connector. The DB9 connector will go in the back of your computer if your computer supports a DB9 serial input. On most older, modern, well, kind of older workstations, they do include a serial port. On the RJ45 connector, you're going to plug it into your Cisco router. There should be a blue little square or underline that says console. You'll connect it there. If you do not have a DB9 connector, you could use the wonderful thing Cisco has included is a USB port configuration. It's the same thing as a DB9 connector, but a more modern standard. You can use on all computers that have a USB port. Anything that has a USB port, pretty much, you can use. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look up our port. So let's try to see, will port COM1 work? No. Well, there's a reason for that. COM1 is, in particularly for serial, some computers don't start with COM1, some do. Of course, look to see if your computer does. The one where we can look is we're going to use Windows Device Manager. So within Device Manager, you're going to see a thing called Ports, COM, and LPT. You're going to left click on it, and it's going to show your current ports. Well, I don't see a USB serial. Let's go ahead and connect our USB in. As we can see, we are now USB serial device COM6. We're going to come over here to Putty, and we're going to type in COM6. Press enter, and here we are. So we're going to press enter, and I have reset this router so we can start playing with it. So we are currently in the user executive mode. The one way you can tell in your user executive mode is by this caret. So it will say your host name, you name your router, which we will here in a second. For example, router caret. So that caret just signifying, hey, we're in user exec mode. So we're going to go into the next mode, which is called privilege mode. To enter privilege mode, you're going to type in EN, or you can type enable. But to check to see if this EN is valid input, you're going to press down shift and then press your question mark key. Right there, it will give us the current lines of what we can use, our current arguments. So if we delete enable and we just go ahead and shift question mark, here's our entirety of available commands. Now, of course, if you want to see more, it will stop at one point, just press space, and it should start printing out the rest. This is the available amount of commands you can use currently. But we want to configure the router. So to do that, we need to type enable or en, press enter. Now we're called in the privileged executive mode, which is defined by this pound sign. That's how we're going to know we're in privilege. If you do the question mark again, as you can see, we have quite a bit more commands / arguments. This is because, as a user, you don't want some random person coming in and changing all your settings and change their network traffic to go to one of their off-branch routers or servers. Make it steal your information that way, customer, employee, etc. So that's why we put the more advanced commands in user executive mode. Oh, I highlighted the wrong one there. Everybody makes mistakes here. So let's move on to our global configuration mode. So to enter global configuration mode, you're going to type in config T, space T. Now you could type out configure terminal, but this is the shortcut for configuring terminal. Press enter. Now, as you can see, there's something new called config. That pound sign signifies we're still in privileged executive mode. Now we have configure in privileged executive mode. So let's say I want to change the name of this router. To change your name in router, you start typing hostname, space the name you want to route. Name it. For instance, I wrote it as Cisco router. After doing that, you want to write your configuration. You type int wr enter. That's going to build that configuration and save it for the startup file. It's a startup txt. Once the router starts up, it's going to be like, okay, what's my startup configurations? Alright, I'm going to jump over here and take a look at my text file, and I want to load that into my running configuration to start everything up, have my host name, my IP addresses, my DHCP server, my AAA rules, my users, etc. But for right now, we're going to stick to simple. So after writing our host name, let's look at our available ports. Or, if you don't know what your available ports are, we're going to type in show. You can do sh, int, or actually we're going to look at the IP interfaces. Show IP int brief. Press enter. As you can see, there's our current interfaces. Alright, so you might ask, why are these 0-0/0 and it goes 1, 2? Well, these are the ports that your network is going to be driven through primarily. Over here is Gigabit Ethernet 0. That is called our management port. And I'll show you in another video how to set up a management port. So let's configure 0/0/0/0 or 000. To do that, I'm going to go in configure terminal, type in int gi for gigabit 0, 0, 0. Now here we got two things. We first want to name our port. So give a host name to our port so the DHCP server knows what it's doing. Of course, you can configure it manually. So IP stands for Internet Protocol. DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. We're going to be a client to the DHCP server on our network. We're going to say, hey, our host name is now going to be Cisco router. Press enter. That has now saved the host name. So say you want to get an IP address automatically from your DHCP. Typically you won't do this unless you manage your pools and static IPs from your DHCP manually, then yes. If you do not, I would suggest putting a static IP on the router itself. So let's go with the DHCP option. We're going to say IP address DHCP. So that's now going to get an IP address from our DHCP server. Give it a couple seconds, and it should. Oh, almost forgot to tell you all the commands. Before we end it, we got to say no shut, no shutdown, or simply no shut. So imagine it as the interface as a gate. We're going to say shut to stop any traffic from coming in, and no shut for allowing traffic in. So no shut, for instance, is the command we're going to use. Now we're going to write that configuration. As you can see, it's changed to down. Ooh, that's good. There it goes. Now it changes itself to up. Now give it a couple of seconds. It should gain an IP address from our DHCP. It seems like we're having trouble. So instead of automatically putting an IP address, we're going to do this instead. Oh, never mind. It just took a second. The packets delayed a little bit, that latency there. But let's say I want to configure my IP address manually. Well, we're going to say IP address, and then make sure you know your network ID, or the IP address you want to put it on. For instance, 10. This is private network, and we're going to put it on 35. Make sure you have your subnet mask, which I already subnetted the default mask, which is 255.0.0.0, and I instead put it at 255.255.0.0 or /16 notation. Press enter. That's going to tell your DHCP server, and it's going to send an ARP request out, or discovery request, more like it, saying, hey, here's my new IP address, this is who I am. Write that configuration. And now we're going to look at our status IP, and voila. Now we have automatically put our IP address as that. Let's ping our beautiful router. This is my default gateway, and success. So we have configured it correctly, and it has pinged successfully. This is just the basic configuration so far. Before we end this video, we're going to talk about we're going to set a user in here. So we're going to set a enable password. You can also use secrets, core wide encryption you need. And we're going to call it Cisco 123. What this does, it puts a password on the enable console. So if you don't know users, or just want to get going until you get an IT person there, or somebody more knowledgeable with Cisco, this will get you running so far. So to test to see if our password has applied, we're going to exit, enter, type in for enable, and there we go. We are now back into our privilege and secondary mode. And the video will end here. I want to thank everybody for watching. You guys have a good day, and as always, stay savvy.